Socials.
Welcome back to the Astrocast. I'm your host, Rue. Today is Tuesday, May 14th, 2024. And indeed, the Aurora Borealis has touched us all. All of us in the Northern Hemisphere had quite an incredible experience over this past weekend. Mainly Friday night, though there were reports of some lesser sightings into Saturday night. And I even heard some people say Sunday, though I cannot confirm those. We had reports as far down south as Puerto Rico that I have personally anecdotally heard. And I suppose we'll get more and more information as time goes on. But wow, what an incredible event for us to all get the chance to witness. I hope if you're listening to this that you did indeed get a chance to go out and see exactly what happened, because it truly is a once in a generation type event for such an incredible thing to take place. So to give you some context, the last time that something similar occurred was way back in 2003. But even then, the Aurora were, in my opinion, nowhere near as incredible as what we saw on Friday night, May the 10th. I remember I was just 19, 18 years old. I was working at Pizza Hut, one of my first jobs. I think it was Pizza Hut. I know me and my buddy Chris were driving back home together, and we were on a country back road, heading back to the house, and we saw something red up in the sky, and it caught our eye so much that we stopped the car and got out, and we stood there staring at it, just wondering what the heck it was we were seeing, because we'd never seen anything like it. And after staring for about 10 minutes, we finally were just like, I don't know what that is. And we got back in the car and left. And the next day, when we went into work, one of our coworkers came up to us and said, "Did you happen to see any of the Aurora last night?" And then we finally put it together and said, oh, it was an Aurora that we saw, because we had no idea. Of course, it was a very different time back then. In 2003, social media was not like it is today. We didn't have that instant connection to, all the world that we have now. We did have, the early internet, not super early internet, obviously, but nowhere near like what we have today, where, you can instantly know about everything that's happening at the drop of a dime. So luckily for me, I was working Friday around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon when I heard about the potential for the solar storm. This has been a bucket list item of mine, as I'm sure it is, many of yours as well. But to be able to actually witness Aurora is something that I have wanted to do for as long as I can remember. And I have often thought about planning a trip out to Norway, or, any of the more highly visible areas where people tend to go to view the Aurora. And the main thing that has prevented me is just the horror stories that I have seen about people going for a whole week and getting clouded out the whole time and not being able to see anything. Unfortunately, it's not something that we can predict. It's by chance. But when these chances do come up, it is very important that we recognize the opportunity that is before us. And I'm hoping a lot of you were able to really take advantage of what happened on Friday, because it is very likely it might not ever happen again, and in a lot of our lifetimes that are going to be listening to this. So as far as, a storm that powerful making its way that far south. So it started as a G4 storm, which is already, a very, very big solar storm capable of knocking out, radio frequencies and disrupting cell phone networks, etc. And as the night wore on, it actually got upgraded to a G5 storm, which did impact radio communications from aviators and marine operators. There were noticeable effects on GPS during the storm. So it really did have a large impact. And I think all of, you know, everything that happened kind of remains to be seen. And I'm sure all that data will come out over the next few weeks as it comes in. But I would love to know what you guys did if you were able to do anything when you heard about this storm. And that's kind of, you know, what I'm going to be talking about today is just the incredible experience that I had on Friday. So around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when I saw the possibility for this storm, and I believe it was our local meteorologist here, Brad Panovich. He's kind of a local celebrity here in Charlotte. He's an astronomer as well. He actually attends the Charlotte Amateur Astronomers Club on a fairly regular basis. And he's a very intelligent guy. I actually had a chance to meet him one night when I was supposed to be going down to the observatory, and I couldn't make it because something came up. And then I found out he was down there, and it ticked me off. But whatever, you know, you win some, you lose some. But anyway, he had posted that there was going to be the potential for this huge storm. And when I saw that, I knew what it meant. And I knew that I wanted to definitely take advantage of it. This is something I didn't want to slip by my fingers. So first thing I did is I went to my wife and I said, do you mind if I go chasing this Aurora tonight? And she knew how important it was to me. So she, of course, said that's perfectly fine. She is not one who likes to stay up super late at night out in freezing cold, which I completely understand. That is not for everyone. But she did want to make sure that somebody was going with me. So I called up a couple friends. One couldn't go, one could go. So I talked to him and he said he was down for making the trip. And then I started my search. And I say I started my search because I wasn't going to go further south, which would be where I would normally go to get a dark sky. Normally I would just, you know, go down to the astronomy club and, you know, hang out there under Borealis 4 skies that are pretty great, all things considered. But for this particular night, I knew I needed to head north because I am in Charlotte, North Carolina, as many of you know. And what the predictions were saying was it could be as low as the Carolinas, but, you know, being the person I am, I wanted to make, you know, quite sure that I gave myself the best possible chance to see these that I could. So my bet was to head up into the Blue Ridge Mountains. So what I did was I first opened up lightpollutionmap.info, which is a site that I have mentioned many times on the show. And it's an excellent resource if you ever need to find a dark site, especially if it's a situation like this where something comes up and you need to go somewhere and you don't really know, you know, where you're going to go necessarily. Like me, I wanted to find a spot that was as high elevation as possible and as dark as possible, and ideally away from people if possible. And I'll tell you why that's important later. But so I started looking on light pollution map, and I ended up in an area right near the North Carolina and Virginia border, but on the western side where the Blue Ridge Mountains are. And the reason I was looking there is because the average elevation was around 2,800 to 3,000 feet, or, you know, roughly 800 to 900 meters. So I knew that that was kind of my area that I wanted to be in. So once I had that picked out and I knew that it was Borealis 3 skies at 3,000 feet elevation, which is something that I have not experienced yet, I might add. I have seen Borealis 1. I guess technically they're 2, but I consider it 1. I won't get into the details, but it's at sea level. So, you know, the seeing's not great because of that. So 3,000 feet, very, very, very good. And I'll get into the specifics when we get to that part. But I opened up Google Earth. So I actually downloaded Google Earth Pro for desktop. You can run Google Earth through a web browser now. But since I was doing a pretty in-depth hunt, I wanted every tool possible available to me. So I went ahead and downloaded Google Earth Pro. And I started searching up and down in that area for a place that looked good. And when you're looking for a place where you want to go for one night to image, And this isn't necessarily, just for when Aurora happened. This might be, let's say that, there's any cosmic event that's happening and you want to go somewhere that's really good and dark. This is an excellent method, and it's one that I've used many times to great success. So open up Google Earth and start looking around. And one of the places that often works well for me is a graveyard. Because graveyards oftentimes don't have any trees. They're a lot of times in big open fields. And sometimes, not all the times, but sometimes they don't have too many houses around them. So if you can find a public graveyard that is in a very dark area, Bortle 3 or better, then you're going to be in a great spot. Obviously, you don't want to go on private property. So you would want to avoid that, particularly if you're going out to the middle of nowhere. That is the last thing that you should do. If you know somebody that has land out in the middle of the nowhere, obviously check with them, and that would be a great way to go. But I didn't know anyone up there. So a public place like a graveyard is excellent because I don't have anything to hide. If anybody comes up and asks me what I'm doing, the red headlamp will generally give you away to anyone that's passing by if they want to, stop and ask what you're doing or what have you. But again, if you're just parked quietly in a graveyard and not bothering anyone, I don't think anyone's going to mess with you. And particularly on this night, because it was worldwide news that the Aurora were happening. So I didn't have anyone stop by. We did have a couple of cars pull up at one point, but I think they were just pulling up to see if they could view the Northern Lights as well. So I located the site. So after searching for a good solid hour and a half, I found what I considered to be the perfect spot for viewing. So it was a graveyard, as you might have guessed, and it was up in a town called Indian Valley, Virginia, which is a really small town. And it was about a 3-hour drive from Charlotte. So I was getting off of work at 5, and I knew that there was a storm rolling through Charlotte from 5 to 6, and I wanted to wait until that storm was gone. So went and picked up my buddy right around 6, and we started heading north. And after about 3 hours, we ended up getting there. And it was very, very, very dark up there. And I mean dark. So I can't really speak to the Milky Way, unfortunately, because I didn't get to stay late enough for the Milky Way to rise overhead. I had been up since 5:30 in the morning on Friday. I stayed as long as I could. I stayed until the Aurora died down. But man, I wish I could have seen the Milky Way overhead, because I would have loved to have a direct comparison to a Bortle 3 site at 3,000 feet versus a Bortle 1 site at sea level. And if this is your first time listening and you hear me saying Bortle 1, Bortle 3, Bortle this, Bortle that, let me just briefly explain to you. The Bortle scale is a system that we astronomers use to determine how good the sky quality conditions are. So essentially, it's how dark the area that you are in is. And the lower the number, the better the darkness. So a Bortle 1 would be perfect skies. So like a, international dark site essentially is going to be your Bortle 1. Bortle 10 would be the middle of Manhattan, and the only stuff you can see are planets and the moon. And even those you might have a hard time making out, the planets, that is. Most of us live in suburban environments in America that are, anywhere from Bortle 6 to 8. I personally live in a 6, borderline 7. I tend to think we've gone 7, even though Light Pollution Map still says that it's 6. Sure looks like a 7 to me. I'd love to get a sky quality meter and test it out. And when you are looking for dark skies, it's when you get into in my experience anyway, when you get down to Bortle 5 and Bortle 4, that's when the Milky Way starts to appear. And at Bortle 4 and 3 is when it really starts to appear. 5, you can make it out, but it is very faint. 4, on a really good night with really good seeing and no moon, you can pretty clearly make it out overhead. And then when you get down to, 3, 2, and 1, it just gets better and better and better. And when we're at our dark site in 27 days, only less than 4 weeks now, we're under a month away, we will be looking at the Milky Way under Bortle 1 skies all night long. And when you get to that dark of a sky, it's absolutely incredible. The Milky Way appears to be marbled in color, and you can actually see veins of nebulosity running directly through it when you look into the core and overhead. Clouds, it's so dark that clouds just appear to be black spots overhead. You can't even make out clouds. It's just stars disappear and then reappear. It was unreal the first time that it happened because I was like, where did all those stars go? And then I realized, wait, there's a cloud there now. I'm so used to seeing the, gray muddled skies that we have here in Charlotte that it didn't occur to me that when stars disappear in under dark skies, that's because a cloud could be there. So the Bortle 3 skies were incredible. I'll just go ahead and tell you, I was able to see an amazing amount of stars that just completely blows my front yard out of the water. I can't speak to the Milky Way, though my gut is telling me that if we were able to hang out till 2 or 3 in the morning, that we would have had one hell of a view of the Milky Way from that site. So from everything I've read, they say that as you go up 1,000 feet, that the visual magnitude for what you can see from stars goes up 1 magnitude with every 1,000 feet. I don't know if that's necessarily true, and it seems like that scale wouldn't be able to keep up because magnitudes get so dim when you get up to like 10. But in any case, I can definitely say at 3,000 feet, it looks incredible. So it just makes me wonder, if you go out to the West Coast under the Rocky Mountains where you're, twice as high, 6,000, 7,000 feet, I can't imagine what that must look like under Bortle 1 skies. I've got to see that at some point. So that's definitely still on my bucket list. So we headed up and we arrived after, 3 hours. I brought my Canon R7 as well as several different lenses. I brought a Canon 16 millimeter, a 50 millimeter lens. I brought both of my TT Artisan lenses, which are great wide field lenses. I own the 11 millimeter fisheye lens that is f2.8, I believe. Let me check. Yes, so it's f2.8 for the 11 millimeter. And then I also have a 7.5 millimeter fisheye lens that is f2. And these were they ended up being the stars of the night for me. And I'm so glad that I brought these lenses because frankly, they blew my Canon RF lenses out of the water in terms of quality and chromatic aberration and pinpoint stars and everything else. I've recommended these lenses before on the show. I am going to highly recommend them after, the quality of photos that I got Friday night. I guess this was my first time like truly using them out in the field, doing, 10-second exposures over and over again, which is pretty much what I was doing for the majority of the night. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll drop links to both of those lenses in the show notes. And they're very inexpensive. They go for not much at all. I think I paid $130 for one of them. And the other one, I know they're both under $200. So you really can't go wrong. And I can't speak highly enough. And the photos that I ended up taking, which is what I'm about to talk about, I am going to put all of those in the show notes as well, because I really want you guys to be able to check those out, because I know you've probably seen a whole lot of photos of the Aurora, but I think I really got some special ones. So I want to share them with you guys, and you can let me know. And then I also would love to see your photos. So if you guys happen to get any photos of the Aurora, if you want to post them on your social media and then just tag them with hashtag the Astrocast or hashtag Astrocast. Actually, let's stick with hashtag the Astrocast because it'll be more unique than Astrocast. Let's do that. So if you want to post any of your Aurora photos for me to see, whether it be on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, I think I'm on all those. I'm on TikTok as well. So if you want to post them there, or of course, if you don't want to use social media, email them to me at ruastrocast@gmail.com. I would love to look at them there as well. But if you post them on social media, use hashtag the Astrocast, and I will again post all of mine in the show notes because I definitely want to see what you guys came up with. So I brought my Canon R7. And I brought several lenses. I ended up using 4 lenses throughout the night. And I also actually brought my wide field telescope. And I brought it in case the night was a bust, basically. And I figured, well, I'll be on top of a mountain. I'll have really dark skies. And I can, try to shoot RAW or, something along those lines. I didn't even end up pulling my telescope out. It sat in the truck the whole time because the Aurora were incredible. So when we first arrived, I got out of the truck, and first of all, it was freezing cold on top of that mountain, which kind of shocked me. I mean, I know it's obviously going to be colder in the mountains, but when I looked online at the weather report for that particular area, it said it was going to go down to 48 that night. It was definitely colder than 48 degrees, and the wind was just howling. So really, really strong wind, very cold out. I brought a hoodie, but I was wearing flip-flops. Thank God I had pants on. My wife told me like 3 times to bring shoes, and I forgot to grab them. So oops, forgot about that. But I grabbed my tripod. So I got a really nice, thick, sturdy tripod, which you want in situations like this. Just another reason why you should not skimp out on your tripods. So I used to, before I got serious about my photography and astrophotography, I would just go to, Best Buy and buy a $30 plastic cheap tripod. And that's not to say you can't get a good plastic tripod. You absolutely can, but not the little chintzy $30 ones that break super easy. So yeah, I was super glad to have a very, very sturdy liquid head tripod. So I got that set up. I grabbed the R7. And have you ever experienced this? You get to a site. I'm sure you have if you've been to a dark sky site. You get somewhere and it's so dark and there's so many stars in the sky that you can't find your basic constellations that you're used to seeing all the time from your home. This has happened to me a couple of times now, and I love it. It just cracks me up when it happens. So when that happens, I always start looking for the Big Dipper. That's usually the safe bet. So I found the Big Dipper and I said, okay, well then Polaris must be here. So I knew like which area to aim in. But when I went back into the car, after I had set my tripod up, I went back in to get my Canon R7. And I guess I got turned around at some point. Like I say, we were on top of a mountain. It was dark. The wind was howling. Confusing situation. Very important to know your gear inside and out when you get into situations like this, because, it can be stressful when it's really cold out. You're in an area that you don't know. It's dark out. You're in the middle of nowhere. You want to get the shot, though. Like, you drive 3 hours for a reason. And you might not have a whole lot of time. You might have some weirdo run up on you and run you off. You might have the police come up and say, hey, you need to leave. Any number of things can happen. So if you arrive in a situation like that, you want to be able to work quickly so you can guarantee that you can at least get some shots. So I say all this because I go and I grab my Canon R7, and then I come and I set back up on the tripod, and I take a 10-second exposure. And I saw like red going through my exposure, but there was like a line where it kind of cut off towards the top of the photo. And it almost looked like a brake light reflecting or something. And I was super confused. I was like, what is that? And I started like looking at my lens. I was like, let me swap lenses real quick and see. So I swapped lenses, put a different one on there, and it was still happening. I'm like, what the heck is that? I was so confused. And then like, I'm looking around. It's like, is there a light or something that's on that it's picking up? And then I look up and I realize, wait a minute, the Big Dipper's not here. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm not even facing north. So I turn around, I pick up my whole tripod and I turn it around and I face it north. And then I take another 10-second exposure. And then my jaw drops whenever I see the preview show up on the screen. So what I was seeing while I was facing south was indeed Aurora, and it was just all cast red because it was all the way to the south already. But when I turned around and actually aimed to the north, man, oh man, what I saw was absolutely incredible. So I realized the error of my mistakes, and very quickly, started shooting lots and lots of photos. So I was experimenting with obviously different ISOs, different lengths of shutter. Whenever you're in a situation like this and you haven't shot the specific thing that you're going for, you want to make sure that you try, different exposure lengths, different ISOs, and, just different situations, because what you don't want to happen is to get to the first one that looks decent on the preview screen and then just say, okay, that's good enough, and shoot for the rest of the night. I've done that before when I was newer to photography, and then I come home and realize that my ISO was way too high, or, and now I've got really noisy photos, which is something that you don't want to do. I actually was in such a dark area. I ended up at like ISO 400, I believe, for the majority of my shots. And they were 10 to 15 seconds, depending on the lens that I was using. I stopped down the f2 to 2.8 and then the 2.8 to f3.5. So stopped those both down once. And I basically sat there for about 2 hours, just losing my mind, taking photo after photo after photo, and just gawking at the beauty of it all. So it wasn't just the photos that I was seeing. After a few minutes, and whenever it started getting truly dark outside, because when we arrived, it wasn't quite astronomical darkness yet. And if you don't know, astronomical darkness is the time period in which we astronomers say that it is truly dark outside. So you no longer have any of the residual light from the sun showing over the horizon or, into the sky, as it often does well after sunset. Particularly as we approach summertime, you only have a few hours of true astronomical darkness in the middle of July, for example. So anyway, as we reached true astronomical darkness, the aurora started appearing right before our eyes. And this was the moment where I just kind of lost it. Like I couldn't believe I was seeing what I was seeing. So the reds were first apparent, and they started appearing like columns before us. So, one column, and then a second column would appear, and then a third column would appear. And at one point, I called my buddy over because he was freezing. He was having to take breaks and go back into the truck. But at one point it started really popping off, and like everything was going nuts. And he came over and we were staring together, and I was looking overhead because there was a blue aurora that was pretty much directly overhead, and it was swaying back and forth, almost like a snake slithering. It waved. And I was like, wow, I think my jaw literally dropped. I was just so blown away by what I was seeing. It was hard to keep shooting photos in that moment because it was so incredible. I had a decision to make too, which is a tough one. That if you ever run into a similar scenario, you would probably have to make too. And that is whether or not you're going to do a time-lapse photo. So a time-lapse photo meaning I'm going to take basically the same framed photo over and over and over again, and then put them all next to each other to create a short video, which is obviously something that is incredibly beautiful to do with Aurora. But I ended up deciding not to do that. And I'm super glad that I did, because I needed to keep swapping lenses until I found the perfect situation. And I ended up, starting with the Canon lenses and then working my way to the TT Artisans. And I think I went back and forth several times. and I was super, super happy with the outcomes. So they ended up being just gorgeous photos. And like I say, I'll share them with you. And I'm sure that there are better photos of Aurora in the world. I know there are. I've seen them with my own eye, but they aren't my photos. And every time that I look at those now, I'm going to get to remember that. And I hope that a whole lot of you got to experience that same thing for the first time, because man, oh man, there is just something really special about experiencing a cosmic event for the first time. And that was one that I wasn't sure if I was ever going to be able to experience. So really, really special. I mentioned earlier in the show that you want to look for a place that ideally doesn't have houses around. And let me tell you, the one down thing about where we picked, or where I picked, I should say, is there was a house that was probably a half mile away, maybe a third of a mile. And it was down the hill. So if you can imagine a mountain, and we're on top of the mountain, and that's kind of where the graveyard is. And it's clear all the way down the hillside. And then there was a house across the main road that we came off of all the way down at the bottom. And unfortunately, that house had one of those obnoxiously bright blue LED lights on in the front yard. And they left it on all night long. I don't know if it was like a motion detection lamp, because it did turn off a couple of times, but then came right back on shortly after. And that was just so disappointing, because it was just really, really bright. I had a red headlamp on. I was really hoping, I knew that they saw us up there, because I'm like, of course they see the one truck pull into the graveyard up the hill from their house. So I'm thinking to myself, like, surely they see my red headlamp. They see me setting up the camera. But, unfortunately, in the world that we live in, it just doesn't occur to most people that aren't into astronomy that turning their lights off can be so helpful. My neighbor had no idea, and he's a super nice guy. But, after I sat down and talked to him and explained it to him, he was like, oh, man, yeah, of course, no problem. And honestly, he never even turns his lights on anymore. And I absolutely love it, because, it gives us a darker sky. But I say that because, it really stinks that more people didn't get to truly, truly appreciate the aurora as they could have, because of the light pollution that we suffer on a whole on this beautiful planet of ours, because we do not properly take care of our lights. So, back in the day with sodium vapor lights, the yellow ones that you may have remembered if you grew up, years ago, they were all calibrated to one frequency. And because of that, it's easy to filter out the sodium nitrate, I believe they're called, lamps. But as the world moved away from that and into LEDs, unfortunately, LEDs, they're just white light. And that is not any kind of light that you can easily filter out, because it comes in a broad spectrum of wavelengths. So you have to, you basically have to do narrow band to work under those kind of conditions. And your eyeballs can't really adjust to narrowband situations. So we end up with, these incredibly bright blue lights that are not natural at all. They disrupt our circadian rhythms. They disrupt the circadian rhythms of all of the animals, the birds, the insects. I mean, just the whole livelihood of our planet gets disrupted by them. And then we don't even have the decency to aim them properly. I can't tell you how many times I'm driving around in a urban or even suburban area, and I see businesses with these bright LED lights that are aiming straight up into the sky. Like, why would you point an LED light directly into the night sky? I do not know. All of this goes back to man's primal innate fear of the dark. And I understand that that is a difficult thing for lots of people to overcome. But if you talk to your friends, your family, and your neighbors about light pollution, maybe if you could convince one person that you know to, maybe switch to a softer, warm light instead of the bright blue, white LEDs. And if we could all do that, just imagine the difference that we could make. Or maybe if we could tell them about, shielding lights properly and aiming them so they're not going up into the night sky, but actually lighting up, the area of their front yard or the front of their business that they're actually trying to protect, quote unquote. Motion sensor lights. If everything was on a motion sensor, you could still, have it light up when some weirdo's walking across your yard, or, more likely a cat or a dog, which is what most people end up lighting up. But, at least then it would be dark for the majority of the time. And these are the conversations that I really, really hope that people can start having. I feel like if we could have somehow magically gotten all of those lights turned off on Friday night throughout, the entire Northern Hemisphere, that we would have had a really convincing argument to make for an international dark skies day, 3 times a year during new moon, which is kind of like what my dream is. And if I ever get this show to a big enough platform to where I am able to actually, speak power, if that day ever comes, that is definitely the soapbox that I will stand on, is the one for light pollution. I feel like it's one of those things where if we somehow manage to still be here 100 years from now and we solve all of the inherent problems that we are facing as humankind right now with technology and smart thinking on, our parts as humans, that eventually we would tackle light pollution. I feel like if you take care of, actual pollution, and then, you start taking care of the environment and global warming and, all of the various problems that we have, and you take care of those, then light pollution is kind of a natural place to go to after that. But the sad thing is there's no reason we can't do it right now. So anyway, I'm not going to spend the whole night rambling on about light pollution, but if you get a chance to talk to your friends, families, your neighbors, please do. And just, talk to them about how important it is to have a dark sky, because, they don't know what they're missing. And if they did know what they were missing, they might turn those lights off for you. So anyway, back to where we were, that one obnoxious light that was about a third of the way down the mountain, a third of a mile down the mountain, I should say, was just really, really bright. But other than that, it was a phenomenal sight. I can't go back to that specific site because of that light. I wouldn't want to do astronomy all night long in a place that had a bright light like that. So I wouldn't even recommend that to anyone else. But in any case, that's why it's really important to take your time and scout as much as you can when you're looking for a public place to go, if you're trying to go out to a dark area. Ideally, you would go to an observatory. And I actually wanted to try an observatory first. There's a place called the Dark Sky Observatory in North Carolina in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And it was more west than north for us. And I actually called up there before finalizing my plans and asked, if they had place for someone from the Charlotte Astronomy Club to set up. And indeed they do. They got a beautiful spot high up on the mountains, but they were having bad weather that night and they weren't sure if it was going to clear up in time for the Aurora Borealis to be visible. And I wasn't willing to take a chance. So I will go definitely check that spot out, because it looks like it's a beautiful spot, also in Bortle 3, but it's an observatory, which means you can stay all night and you don't have to worry about anyone with bright, LED lights bothering you. Another reason you should join your local astronomy club, because that's the best place to go if you want dark skies. So anyway, I took a whole bunch of photos, and then eventually, after looking at Scorpio for quite some time, because my buddy who was with me, Tay, he's a big fan of Scorpio, and he was having me name various stars as he pointed at them. I think I finally got exhausted or finally realized I was completely exhausted when he stumped me with Spica. Again, I blame the fact that there were just so many more visible stars out there than I'm accustomed to seeing at home. I was just like, I'm not sure, man. I can't remember. So anyway, normally I definitely know where Spica is, but he got me that night. So um, we ended up leaving, I want to say shortly after midnight. They had definitely died down quite a bit, the Aurora. I don't think any were happening by the time we left. And it took, easily 3 hours to get home. I didn't get home until about 3:30 in the morning. And man, oh man, was I tired. I was just beyond exhausted because, like I said, I'd been up since 5:30 in the morning. So I woke up around 10 a.m. and I was kind of doing my normal wake up routine and flipping through Facebook, and I was seeing obviously a ton of photos of the Aurora, and I just immediately was like, I have to go grab my camera because I knew the photos that I had taken were just pretty incredible, and I wanted to get them out there because I know people were going to get tired of seeing photos of the same thing pretty quick. So I ran outside and grabbed my gear out of my truck, and I quickly dumped everything onto my scratch drive. And then I loaded it all up in Lightroom, and man, oh man, was I impressed with what I saw. So like I say, I ended up editing about 20 of the photos in total. And by far the best ones came from the wide field fisheye lenses that I have from TT Artisans. Just pinpoint stars that came out great across the field, and all kinds of, reds, blues, greens, purples, all the colors of the Aurora just shining through brilliantly. I actually took a video too at one point when the reds were like really bright, like naked eye really bright, because I was like, let me take a video, because I know, video being, in this case, 30 frames per second. I wanted to see how that would show up to give you a better idea of, what it was like naked eye at the time. And I did that, and I can actually post that as well if you guys want to see it. And that ended up showing up incredibly too. So I edited all of my photos and I posted them on my personal Facebook page, which is actually a digital creator page. I switched it over to that about a year ago because I, do so much photography stuff and astrophotography, and it pretty quickly started taking off. So I had one of the people, Brad Panovich, the guy that I mentioned earlier in the show, the famous, locally famous meteorologist here in Charlotte, who's also a big fan of astronomy. He ended up sharing my photos, and he told like a cool story along with them about how, people are always scared to drive somewhere dark because they're afraid it'll be a bust, or they're afraid they might lose sleep. But he said he was just so happy to see somebody actually do it, because you never know when that might pay off and you'll end up with, incredible memories and incredible photos like I ended up getting. And I thought that was really nice of him, because he had shared a lot of people's photos, but he didn't really caption any of them. And he left, a nice little comment on mine. And then it started kind of blowing up from there. I've never had any of my photos go wild online before, but long story short, they ended up getting seen by like 130,000 people. I think it was at last time I checked. It had been shared over 550 times. So I guess you could say they locally went viral in the Charlotte area. The news station put them on their site. The guy said he was going to show them on air, but I don't really watch the news, so I don't know. I checked one. I recorded the next airing of the news at 6, but they weren't on there, but they didn't really show any of them. So I don't know if it ended up on the news or not. But it was definitely on the news's website, and just everybody was sharing them. So that was really cool. So I had my little miniature viral moment from my Aurora photos, which was awesome. So I kind of wish that I had posted them to some bigger, not local places, right? Whenever I did. But I didn't. And I don't want to go back now and do it because, it's already kind of after everything has happened. And I don't want to be, the guy who keeps talking about something forever. Anyway, whatever. But they did really, really well. It was super cool because, like I say, I've been a photographer for years and I've never had any of my photos like take off like that. So that was really cool to see. And it just kind of, not that I needed any justification for my trip. The justification was in the memories that I made 100%. Being able to experience that, like I say, lifetime goal of mine. So if I didn't get a single picture, I would have been thrilled just being able to see what I saw. But that is just the cherry on top, was having that go the way that it did. And it really, really made my day. So that was my experience with the Aurora Borealis. And like I say, I would love to know you guys if you've got a cool story, or even if it's not a cool story, but you ended up getting some photos. I would love to see them. I'd love to hear your stories. So like I say, if you want to share them online on social media, you can hashtag the Astrocast, or if you'd like to email me and email the photos or a link to the photos, you can email me at ruastrocast@gmail.com. And I'll be happy to, on next week's show, I'll be happy to post links to some of the best ones that I find, and just share them with everybody. So I'll be happy to do that. So I really, really look forward to hearing from you guys on that. I hope you all were as excited and still are as excited as I was and am about this happening, just because, man, once in a lifetime event, and just like I say, something we might not ever see again. So you hear that so often in astronomy too, once in a lifetime event, but this like really was a once in a lifetime event. So really, really special, and just happy to share it with you guys. One other quick note on one of my photos, and you guys may have seen photos with a similar happening, but I noticed when we were out looking at the Aurora, I saw the ISS going by, and I was able to get a few exposures with it in there, and one came out really good. So that was super cool too, just to know that I got the ISS at the same time as the Aurora was really awesome. On a different note, I have been seeing a lot of photos of this nebula CG4. It's colloquially referred to as God's hand. And I'm sorry, that is not God's hand. That is 100% Shai-Hulud, or better known as the sandworms from Dune. It looks just like a sandworm from Dune. And I really, really want to image it, but I'm not sure. I haven't looked up the details. I know that there was a really amazing photo taken of it recently using a dark energy camera, or DCAM. But I don't know if this is one that we amateurs are able to get. Sure, looks like it. Looking at these photos, it looks like any other nebula that we would be able to shoot, but I just haven't really gotten around to looking into the details of this particular nebula. It looks like it's a cometary nebula, and it is, let's see, an 8 light year long tendril of gas. So if it's only 8 light years long, unless it's exceedingly close, I'm willing to bet that this person who took this photo did it at a crazy long focal length, but maybe not. I'll definitely have to look into that. If any of you guys know about it, or have imaged it before, please let me know. Email me, ruastrocast@gmail.com, because that is something that I would definitely like to shoot. Now, I want to give you guys a recommendation this week, but we got to talk about the recommendations. So I generally, as you know, try to give a recommendation each week that is astronomy related, or at a minimum astronomy adjacent. But I've kind of noticed recently that I don't have an unlimited sack of astronomy items to draw from all the time forever, because I'm constantly, reading new stuff on astronomy, but I cannot in good conscience recommend something to you that I haven't actually read. And while I haven't gone through everything that I have read yet, as far as things that I could recommend to you to also check out, what I can say is that occasionally I would like to be able to throw in something that I just really enjoyed myself that might not necessarily be astronomy related. So this week, I am going to make a recommendation to you by my favorite all-time fiction author. And let's see if you can guess who Rue's all-time favorite fiction author is. I'll give you just a moment. Okay, I'll give you a hint. He is known for writing horror, and he has been around since the 70s. He's probably arguably the most famous horror writer of all time. You've probably guessed it by now. It's Stephen King. But I am not going to be recommending a strictly horror novel by him today. While it does have definite elements of horror within it, the book is actually called Fairy Tale. And as the name would indicate, it is Stephen King's take on a fairy tale. And I actually read this one last year. It was late last year. And it was actually the audiobook. As you guys know, I'm a big fan of Audible. And I can highly recommend the Audible version because the voice performance is phenomenal on it. And Stephen King actually does a cameo as one of the characters, but he's doing his own voice. Anyway, Fairy Tale is an awesome, awesome novel. And it's a little bit slow at first. I will say it takes a little bit to get going. But once it does, it kind of grabs you and doesn't let go. So if you are looking for a good book to read, I can highly, highly recommend Fairy Tale. So there's a ton of great Stephen King books that I could recommend to you. I've read the vast majority of his work, including the entire Dark Tower series. But Fairy Tale is going to be my first one, because if you've never read a King novel, maybe don't start with the horror, because he is a extremely talented writer. And, although he is mostly known for horror, I can tell you that the guy is incredibly capable of writing other genres as well. So next week, we are going to get back into some astronomy and astrophotography tutorials. We will be going over some different tips and tricks. I won't spoil it for you yet, but make sure you come back and join us. Also got some other exciting news. The Astrocast website is coming along quite nicely, and I hope to have that launched within the next few weeks. So definitely keep an eye peeled for that. Thinking about making some shirts, but I don't want to just do cheap drop shipped shirts. That's the last thing I want to do. So I'm thinking about actually getting some made and shipping them out. So maybe we'll do something like that to celebrate the launch of the website. Also, before we go, I want to give a shout out to Carrie and David, our Patreon members. As always, if you would like to support the show, you can do that at patreon.com/theastrocast for either $1 or $5 a month, whichever you feel most comfortable donating to help out the show with. It would be greatly appreciated. So that's gonna just about do it for us this week, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to me jabber on about the Northern Lights for an hour, but something like that doesn't happen very often, so we absolutely had to have an episode to commemorate this amazing, amazing event. So you got about a quarter of the moon right now, so take advantage if you have those clear skies. If you don't, hopefully it'll be there soon. And the Milky Way, like I say, it's starting to come up earlier and earlier. So, within a month or so, it's going to be Milky Way season before you know it. So definitely keep your eyes toward the stars as always. So I'm your host, Rue. You have been listening to the Astrocast. Thank you so much for joining. Clear skies.